We'll begin with the agreement by the World Trade Organization regarding the suspension of e-commerce tariff on that was agreed upon by the WTO at the last ministerial conference, which is the 13th ministerial conference. So there is a moratorium for 2 years. It's been extended by 2 years by the WTO. Let's see what implication that we have. Some countries actually head out on that discussion and refuse to support the decision. But after all, they all came around. I'm talking about countries like India, South Africa, not initially agreeing to the moratorium on e-commerce being extended for another 2 years. This morning, we're joined virtually by Segun Sopitan, who is an economic expert, to be looking at the pros and cons of this new agreement. Good morning, Segun.
Good morning.
Welcome to Rain Exchange. All right, so the World Trade Organization at the 13th Ministerial Conference came to an agreement regarding the extension of moratorium on e-commerce for another 2 years. Initially, some member countries had held that on that decision, but they came around and it was agreed upon. What are the benefits? Let's begin from there.
Well, benefits. I think when you talk about the benefits of the moratorium, you would have to ask benefits to who. So the idea behind the moratorium on tariffs on e-commerce is to recognize that e-commerce as an economic sector and an economic activity globally is relatively new. We're talking 20 years. If you cast your mind back, for those that are old enough, you probably got your first email account maybe in the late 90s. I had my first email account, I think, maybe around 1996 or 1995, or thereabouts. So we're talking 30 years ago. Email, and email, was the very, very first precursor of what we now know, as social media. In that time, we've seen an advent of so many different platforms and take the world by storm. We saw Twitter take the world by storm, Instagram with pictures, images and what have you. And then we had instant messaging, led, I think, in the first instance by Yahoo. They had this chat platform on Yahoo. And then BlackBerry came, and then, to where we are now with WhatsApp and all of that. And all of these platforms, trade happens on them. And that's without going into actual e-commerce websites where goods and services are exchanged, eBay, Amazon, and so on and so forth. So you've seen a growth and a development in that space over the last 20, 25, maybe 30 years. And what the world did at that time was to recognize that this was a pioneer frontier, a new means of carrying out trade, and that would therefore require some sort of support, some sort of help from governments across the world for the players in that sector. So it was agreed at that time that tariffs would be withheld for a while, from companies that were playing in that sector. So if you are involved in any kind of digital commerce, digital exchange of services, gaming, software development, and the likes of them, even content, multimedia content creation and all of that, it was recognized that you are playing in the frontier sector and you needed support, you needed help. Revenues, if you remember, even companies like Netflix, YouTube, and all of these companies did not turn a profit until very recently. So if you are not making profit, it stands to reason that you need some help in terms of taxes, duties, tariffs, and all of that, pending when you then become profitable and you can actually begin to pay all of these, obligations that you have to governments across the world. So the moratorium was to say, look, for a short while, at the start of this, it was supposed to be just for a few years. The expectation being that operators in that sector would then have found their feet and be able to make this payment. However, it hasn't played out that way, and it's taken a whole lot longer for players in this sector to begin to make a profit that would then justify their ability to pay tariffs and to pay taxes and what have you. So the benefits, if you talk about the benefits, you'd say there are, I would say, maybe two major beneficiaries of this. It will be the companies that are playing in this sector and the countries that those companies are from, were the major beneficiaries of this tariff. You find that if you look at the people that were opposed to the extension of this moratorium, you find that the commonality would be that they are either developing or in fact third world countries, where the preponderance of the balance of benefits, if you like, will be in favor of developed economies and the companies that operate out of those developed economies. So South Africa, for instance, would have more to gain by being able to charge tariffs because majority of the players that are operating in their country are from other countries, are from the likes of the United States, are from the likes of maybe the EU, the UK and what have you. So I think the greatest beneficiaries of this concession were developed economies and the companies that operate out of those developed economies. So 2 years, a moratorium of 2 years has been given. 2026, I doubt that there will be a further extension. I think the world has now come to a place where there's stability in that space and companies are beginning to turn very healthy profits. Some of the richest people in the world today are people that are riding on the wave of e-commerce. Jeff Bezos, for example, Amazon. Why is he still getting tariff concessions? Why? One of the richest men in the world. So I think that the time, for those concessions, time is up, and this moratorium would only allow countries enough time to gather their armory in terms of negotiations, whilst they begin to prepare what their tariff policies will be regarding electronic commerce in their various territories.
All right, Segun, good to see you again. Now, there are those who argue, because the debate on global e-commerce on tariffs, tariffs on e-commerce rather, has been in the front burner for years. But there are those who argue that this moratorium will favor some developed economies, just like you said. But let's look at the implication on developing economies, especially when it comes to the issue of revenue. Somehow, that the essence of tariff is to also raise revenue. So how will they be impacted when it comes to sourcing for revenue with this development? What will be the implication of that?
I mean, let's bring it home. Since we're talking about, developing economies, Nigeria is one, and we are Nigerians. What this means for a country like Nigeria, where we're talking of significant revenue shortfalls, the entire subsidy debate, the entire problems that we have around our exchange rate management policies today, really the underlying issue, driving this is just the poor revenue generating capacity of the government. And this scenario is not unique to Nigeria, even though maybe it's worse here. But typically developing economies tend to struggle with the revenue question as a result of lack of efficiency of revenue generation, lack of proper revenue gathering infrastructure, a lack of willpower, on the part of the government, maybe corruption as well. So for various reasons, a lot of these developing countries, including Nigeria, struggle with the revenue issue. And I mean, if you look at the volumes of business that is happening in e-commerce today, it is absolutely clear and absolutely obvious that it is in the interest of these developing economies for this moratorium to end. So take Nigeria, for example. Look at the business that Microsoft is doing in Nigeria. Microsoft is so big in Nigeria that they've had to establish a physical presence. The same goes for Google. The same goes for YouTube. You know, a lot of these multimedia companies now have a physical presence, physical offices with physical staff in Nigeria, because the business that they're generating from Nigeria is we're talking in the billions of dollars in revenue generated from Nigeria. Netflix, you know, you could say the same about Netflix, and you could just go on and on, regardless of whatever sector that you play in, whether it's multimedia, content creation, movies, music, gaming, software, you know, and all of those things. Any kind of digital activity that, once it's not involving, you know, exchange of physical goods, you know, it falls squarely in this purview. And if you look at the revenue generating potential, you just realize that it is critically in the interest of countries like Nigeria for this moratorium to end, so that we can tap into the value creation that these companies are enjoying. You know, you set up your business in the United States, you know, say Netflix, for example, set up your business in the United States, keep one small office in Marina, you know, or in Ikoyi, right, that is manned by maybe 10 people, but your real business is working from outside of the United States, employing thousands of people. And then you ship your digital products across the border into Nigeria, capture a lot of income, take it back to your home country, pay your taxes in your home country, and Nigeria is just, you know, just watching. The only benefit we get is, you know, the value that content brings to the people that are buying or paying for the content. But for the country, for the economy, for the government, you know, in those local economies where these companies are playing and having such a great time, we're on the losing end. You know, so it's absolutely important that this moratorium ends as quickly as it can, so that, you know, we can begin to reap the benefits of all of this digital content that is being created. In absolute terms, I wouldn't be too surprised if we're talking a couple of billions of dollars in additional income for the federal government of Nigeria when this moratorium, just from tariffs alone, when this moratorium ends. And then, of course, that also then has the peripheral conversations around taxation, in how to tax, you know, a lot of the business that is happening in the digital space today by the government. You know, there's so much trade happening, and, you know, the government is simply just a bystander. It's just passing right across them, right over their heads. They're unable to tax these things because the reporting channels are not there. The platforms to, you know, ensure that these transactions are adequately captured are not there. The technology required to ensure that those transactions are properly reported is not being deployed. You know, so it's a whole lot, but there's a whole lot that the country can benefit, you know, as a result of the ending of this moratorium. And for me personally, I can't wait to see the moratorium come to an end. I think it will be fantastic for Nigeria, for South Africa, and for other players in the developing world.
All right. Aside the ability to tax some of these tech companies and the major players in the e-commerce industry, now some of the concerns for the countries that did not want to support the extension of moratorium initially, South Africa, India, and Indonesia, they cited the potential loss of data flow. So what would that mean now that it has been extended? What would that mean for these countries in respect to potential loss of data flow and the dominance of major US companies, which they put forward initially as the reason for not wanting the extension?
I mean, you know, just like I said earlier, it's not surprising, you know, to see that it's countries like Indonesia, India, South Africa. India is a bit surprising for me, because India is, in my opinion, is a major beneficiary of the moratorium. India is one of the biggest exporters of technology in the world today. You know, that's a bit surprising for me. But in terms of, you know, the concerns that have been expressed, loss of data flow, of course, if you begin to tax or, you know, apply appropriate tariffs, you know, to e-commerce digital transactions, there will be some moderating effect, you know, that would have. in terms of the volume of transactions that are happening, in that space. So yeah, there may be a bit of a moderation of the flow of content. Let's just call it content. Data flow, when we say data flow, we're talking about data in terms of the exchange of value. We're talking about data in terms of the content that is being created. So if I know as an operator in that sector that for every movie that is streamed or downloaded, across the border, say, I'm operating from India or I'm operating from the United States, and then people are downloading my content in the UK or in Nigeria or in South Africa. One of the things that would likely happen is that I'm going to have to up my prices. I'm going to increase my prices to make up for, that loss of, that leakage of income, if you like, to compensate for that. And if that happens, then what you have is that those services, those products will become a bit more expensive, for the people that are using them. And you might find a few people saying to themselves, do I really need this? And say they drop off and stop using it at all, or using it as much as they used to. So that would definitely have a bit of a mitigating effect, on the flow of information, on the flow of data, on the flow of the services and exchange of, value that this content tend to drive. But in the overall, if you look at the benefits versus, the disadvantages of ending the moratorium, I think that more good will be done for the world as a whole when this moratorium ends, because you can't create value and not pay for it. So for these people that are enjoying the revenues and the income from the value that they're creating, they have to pay. You've got to pay to ensure that the countries where they're bringing in those revenues from can also continue to operate and survive as territories. If that doesn't happen, then how do they continue to take advantage of the markets in those places? So for me, I think the advantages of ending the moratorium far outweighs whatever disadvantage or whatever concern that anybody might be expressing.
All right, let's look at the argument on the part of the Commerce Minister from India. The argument on his own part is that the moratorium favors big tech companies and will also prevent proper competition from developing countries. How do you react to that?
I agree with him. I mean, the dynamics of, the entire e-commerce space is clear, and it's that the flow, the general direction, if you like, of activities is content and value coming out of the developed economies, the developed world, going into the developing world, and money flowing in the opposite direction. So it then means that the major beneficiaries for this moratorium clearly are those people who are pushing out their content, pushing out their value, and getting money in exchange. Now, you're getting that money and you're not paying any part of that money to those places that you're generating the money from. It just simply is not fair. And the World Trade Organization, one of its major objectives is to promote fair trade around the world. So the benefits of the moratorium was clear ab initio. At the very beginning, it was clear. But I think that it has long outlived its usefulness. Right now, it's just been taken advantage of by the big boys, if you like, by the big boys on the globe, in the global space. Big boys as in terms of countries, and big boys in terms of companies. They're just having it's like having free lunch basically right now. They're just having a ride, having a good time, reporting huge profits, seeing their stock prices grow, enriching their owners without paying, the requisite taxes and tariffs in the countries where they're generating this income from. It has to end. So for me, I think the only reason that the moratorium was extended was because there was the time to complete the negotiations was inadequate, and the time for people to gather, to gather their arguments was not adequate. 2 years from today, I'm boldly making the prediction that the moratoriums will not survive the next meeting of the World Trade Organization.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.